JoJo's Bizarre Adventure presents some of the most interesting villains in manga. Each antagonist brings their own philosophies and methods to the table, but they all share one large thing. They lost. So what made these incredibly powerful characters fall in every part of JoJo? Now normally I usually go in order of appearance, but the more you really think about it, I don't really have to do that. Like, there's no rules about this. So with that in mind, Yoshikage Kira. Now, Kira believed that he was entitled to live his quiet life of murder without consequences. This had been due to his upbringing and lack of effective parenting that had been telling him that what he truly desired is a large issue. But his philosophy failed to understand that his desires were inherently incompatible with his peaceful existence. He causes the issues that messes with other people's existence too, so it automatically isn't fair, but you know, he doesn't really believe in fairness. He believes that he's above it all despite everything. And you know, there is a lot of people like that. So look at how he had gone about this in terms of execution. He had to maintain his routines and he couldn't separate himself from his compulsions. So how could he have really won against this? Well, to be honest with you, I don't think it was possible. Now, yes, in terms of the usage of Killer Queen's Bites the Dust or its other abilities, I can give you scenarios where he could have taken over Morio against the Warriors.
MCM backpack, little nigga backpack.
No, not those Warriors, and I still can't believe they got Jimmy for that. The Morio Warriors. But the main issue had been his compulsions and that he would eventually act on them. He was always going to be found out due to the way that he moves. It was inevitable. Okay, fine. Well, what about Cars and the Pillarmen? Well, Cars and the Pillarmen represent the perfect example of superiority leading to the downfall. Cars' belief had been centered on the idea that the Pillarmen need to transcend their own limitations. And it makes sense as they were already at the top of the food chain, you know, I guess. But their belief about humanity and the Hamon warriors had just been the fact that, oh, they're just stepping stones essentially. And they kind of understood nothing about evolution and growth, which is very surprising as they lived for such a long time. The Pillarmen's execution of their goals showed exactly how they had gone about this, because they consistently underestimated human ingenuity. As Joseph specifically proved this point again and again and again and again. They had thousands of years of combat experience and they just couldn't adapt to the fact that he was just so unconventional in his thinking and execution. You know, that's usually how it went for most of their combat strategies altogether. I think for the most part, you can really compare Joseph and his essentially unconventionalness to, let's say, Mango and how he showed up in Melee, or the fact that, oh, hey, I'm LeBron, I can play 5 positions. Sort of, yeah, Magic Johnson, same thing, you know? And I'd say that Cars made the mistake worse than anybody because he achieved his ultimate form. He did the thing that he sought out to do, and he was still overconfident. He had everything. He had a complete immunity to the sun, the ability to transform into any life form and immortality, but he had still lost to a human. And it wasn't even whether or not that Joseph knew he was outclassed. He kind of just do it. Like, that's the humanity approach. Just, hey, look, I'm just going to go on as is. How could they really have won? I think it's pretty simple. The moment that they woke up and discovered, oh, hey, look, there's Hamon warriors. So how did that happen? Smoke them. What are we doing? You could have killed Joseph and Caesar immediately. No playing around. Whoever that has to come into line, like you have to retrain everybody. Just nothing. Straight elimination. They spent thousands of years dealing with all types of people that want to take them down, and now they want to start messing with them. What is that? You know, I get Wamu's warrior code and yada yada yada, but at this point, if I'm Cars and I'm really about my goal, hey, look, we gotta stop these guys immediately. You know, but now we have Golden Wind with Diavolo, and Diavolo was someone who wanted absolute control while simultaneously erasing himself from existence. His philosophy centered on the idea that controlling the future meant eliminating all traces of the past. His split personality and extreme paranoia had shaped every decision that he's made, preventing him from forming any sort of real connection with anybody. Now, in terms of execution, yeah, he had multiple flaws in his approach. You know, he had a lot of paranoia and it worked against him at every turn. He was so focused on maintaining the secrecy that he missed pretty obvious opportunities, I'd say. He had an entire criminal organization at his disposal, but he also ran it terribly. A lot of people put in questions and were really confused about his approach. And, you know, why are we really taking orders from this guy? He doesn't really help us with anything. And in addition to that, he had his fear of exposure. That meant that he was never going to use his team as effectively as he could. He kept everything so close to the chest that even the most, like, loyal people, like the last standing group, they didn't know who they were working for. They just did it. And bigger than that, I honestly think his over-reliance on King Crimson created a whole new problem because, you know, while King Crimson's ability to erase time and see the future is incredibly powerful, I think this is the reason why he really does contrast Giorno because of his predictability with it. And he had not been creative, as Giorno had to be creative with his stand to get it to truly function the way that it should be. And once Diavolo got into contact with you, he became really predictable for the most part. Like, that's what happened with Bruno, and after that, Polnareff understood it, and Giorno understood it, and we're just getting a whole bunch of people that are starting to understand it. Even Risotto understood it. But yeah, he followed the same patterns, erase time, get behind the enemy, strike, or some type of thing. He was like, let me try to get this going. And it's a powerful strategy because a lot of people, you know, they can't really do anything to it. But when you actually had the chance to think past it, yeah, he got cooked a lot of the time. So this honestly shows why he was bound to lose. His personality and fears and just intelligence would really never work with such approach. His execution as a boss, you know, had with the SpongeBob, it has a lot to be desired. The need to erase himself from existence while having absolute control. It's kind of contradictory of itself, but I get how it happens. You know, there's like mobs and crime syndicates and all that type of stuff where they have the similar thing going on. But, you know, for the most part, you can't really rule from the shadows while making sure there's no shadows at all. You know, that kind of really doesn't make any sense. So now you have two people where their philosophies had essentially pointed towards their failures and one count of complete hubris. But let's spin it all back. Let's go to part one with the original Dio Brando. The story of Dio Brando starts with trauma. Growing up in poverty with an abusive father had shaped his entire worldview. He came to believe that absolute power and domination were the only paths to freedom. To Dio, humanity existed as a binary where you're either the hunter or the hunted. His time with the Joestars proved this mindset wrong, but he couldn't see that. The fundamental strength difference between him and the one that Jonathan had gained came from bonds and reaction to adversity. As for Dio, trust remained invisible to him. Jonathan had showed him kindness. George had gave him opportunity, but Dio's experiences had already convinced him that such things were merely weaknesses to exploit. And let's look to how Dio had executed his plans and why he failed. Well, firstly, the slow poison approach that had done up his father, and who was by himself the whole time. That same approach to George Joestar, that had been wasted time and created unnecessary risk and complications. Dio acknowledged that after. But once he discovered the Stone Mask power, why did you even return to the Joestar Manor? He no longer needed to target the Joestars at all. He could have just taken the Stone Mask and sped up the process a bit earlier or found multiple other people in general, entire families, government headquarters, anything. He could have picked any place that Jonathan Joestar wasn't there to oppose him. And I get it, because Jonathan had just been beating him consistently. And he believed that he finally had the thing to get it over him. But man, it is really, really shocking to have that power and to still go neutral. It's really wild if you think about it. But his obsession with proving himself superior to Jonathan had blinded him to very, very simple paths to power. He chose the hardest possible route because of pride and a need for personal validation. He could have won by walking away. He could have won by attacking the manor as a vampire immediately. His need to dominate the Joestars, show him that he is dominating them by specifically attacking George and all of that, it just led him down a path that essentially guaranteed that he's going to create the strongest possible opposition indirectly. His trauma-driven philosophy had essentially made him create his own worst enemy. Now we're actually up to Enrico Pucci, because this is good to jump all the way over there. Now, Pucci believed showing everyone their fate would bring universal peace. Not through force like other villains, but through what he saw as enlightenment, you know? Everyone would know their destiny, accept it, and find peace in that knowledge. The flaw in his thinking, it could be that knowing your fate doesn't equal to accepting it. Pucci misunderstood the basic part of human nature, that we grow through uncertainty and choices, and we kind of like beating the odds in general. His idea of peace through predetermined fate ignored why humans valued free will in the first place. We all know that at the end of our lives is the end, but how we act with said time is what matters about the time that we have left. His execution shows where Dio's influence had twisted his perspective. His devotion to Dio's ideology had blinded him to everything else, because while he had claimed to seek universal peace, his actions stemmed from his own personal trauma and a vendetta against the Joestars that he had now took upon himself. But could Pucci have won? Our conversations about this can only be seen in hindsight at this point, because Pucci had executed one of the greatest plans across the series, and he had still failed, even when he succeeded. So with that in mind, I'm going to say no. I know that for other characters, I believe them like, okay, maybe they can turn off certain aspects of their character, like suppressing their pride and all, but this is Pucci in his entirety. And that's kind of how it goes with these other characters too. So Pucci was pretty much damned from the get. Now, Dio's return in part 3 shows how his philosophy evolved while still staying fundamentally flawed. He now believed that achieving heaven was better for everyone, as it had meant having control over fate and reality itself. This is with the Stone Ocean edition in mind, though, because as Dio and Stars Crusaders existed, he just wanted to take over and be rid of the Joestars. His execution in part 3 comes also with the important context of spending a significant amount of time of hiding to regenerate fully with Jonathan's body. His assessment that he needed to be 100% before confronting the Joestars directly made sense on paper. The issue is that even after achieving perfect regeneration and mastering the world's time stop, he still lost. This shows how Dio really misunderstood what he was going up against. He believed that physical perfection and the world's power would essentially guarantee victory, and honestly, like, be damned, I thought he was going to do it too. But just like in part 1, he failed to account for the Joestar's ability to just overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Now, looking at what Dio could have done differently, I'd say it's pretty rough for him. It's rough, it's crazy, scary, spooky, hilarious, because looking at what Dio could have done differently, you know, he could have moved to another continent entirely while they were on their way, you know, and then he built up even more power without confronting the Joestars. And instead of sending stand users one by one, hell, don't you think he could have coordinated at least multiple attacks with the users together? But more importantly, I think his initial assumption about just needing the perfect regeneration, that thing that he was ready to do and just be like, okay, say that they beat all of my stand users. I'm good now. I'm finna run up on them and take care of this. If he ran into there against the Stardust Crusaders, Dio would have got smoked. They would have turned his TV off. Going on into part 7, we have Funny Valentine. Valentine stands out compared to the other JoJo villains because his philosophy had been masked by patriotic ideals, you know, even though it still created the widespread harm. He genuinely believed everything that he did was for America's benefit. His actions, though, they hurt people across dimensions, you know, and within his own country. And his execution, there's so many contradictions in his character. He preached about sacrifice for the greater good while sacrificing everybody, including his own men and innocent Americans, while claiming that everything was just for America's benefit, and he would constantly declare that this power and glory was his specifically. It doesn't really sound like, oh, I'm a leader, but at the same time, everybody else, you know, when push comes to shove, we got to get rid of everybody else. He was whacked out. Now, could he have won? His careful planning and ability to coordinate attacks through the Steel Ball Run race showed that he was really smart and strategic, but I think his flaw had been that his belief that authority had essentially equaled righteousness, that didn't really work. His might makes right philosophy meant that he could never really truly unite people behind his vision. It was just never possible. If his goal was to be a bad president who funneled resources and power to himself, he'd get fairly far. No one would be able to squabble up. But his genuine personality had been inherently misguided, so I think that he had been bound to fail regardless of the power that he had. So he can make himself all-powerful and successful, but I think there's a large difference between doing that and doing it for the people. And now we're here with Toru from Jojo, essentially the reincarnated will of the Pillarman, but now he's just this man in the garden. Toru is the one who operates from detachment rather than passion. His philosophy as a rock human is centered around the idea of superiority, where he sees himself as a rock atop others, watching and outlasting human dreams and memories. This perspective came from his inhuman upbringing, as he was abandoned as a child and he had developed in isolation. His execution had been being this friendly part-timer facade altogether, while also orchestrating one of the largest organizations ever, being the Lokakaka organization, all from within the shadows. With this, he had planned to create revolutionary medicine through the Lokakaka, to secure global influence, to place rock humans at the top. Now, could Toru have won? I think it's possible that he could have mass-produced the Lokakaka through shell corporations instead of risking direct involvement with the hospital. And at the same time, he has Wonder of You. There definitely could have been a way that he just mitigates majority of his issues. He did as much as his knowledge allowed him to do. So I don't really have much expectations, but I think if he had a lot more mind, maybe a lot more heart, then maybe he could have figured something out eventually in the end. But thank you all for watching. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. You can leave your recommendations in the comments. We'll see if I get to them, hopefully. Until then, peace out and Godspeed. Really helped at all. To be honest with you, it was a really weird case, and I think that Josuke was right in asking, you know, like, why is he around? Essentially, the reincarnated this man in the garden. And it wasn't a good use of his time just messing around playing peekaboo like that.